Good afternoon to you from Wilmington, North Carolina. I am Mark Sudduth. It is July the 3rd, 2023, and you've tuned into the Hurricane Outlook and Discussion. In today's update, we're going to take a look at that headline right there. El Nino not being so tough after all, possibly. We'll also take a look at what's happening out in the tropics as a tropical wave kind of impacting the weather down there in the Windward Islands and another one off the coast of Africa. But by and large, I think the next couple of weeks across the tropical Atlantic and probably the tropical Pacific going to be pretty quiet. We're just in this normal climatological downward trend that we normally see in July. Once we get towards the second half of the month and into August, things will probably change. All right, good to have you with me here the day before Independence Day. Let's see what's happening out there. Of course, nothing in the Atlantic Basin right now. Also, nothing in the Eastern Pacific, so that's great. Looking at the satellite imagery, that is what a dead hurricane looks like. Don't want to sound too macabre about it, but it's true. That is Adrian, the leftovers of it, just a low-level swirl reduced down to just bones, so to speak. And yeah, that's what happens when you get into that cold water. I talked about that delineation down there between the warm tropical waters over here and the cooler, what we call the negative PDO or the PMM, Pacific Meridional Mode. You know what? Acronyms notwithstanding, it means colder water for the most part. And Adrian wandered into that, and that's the end of Adrian. And then Beatrice was down here somewhere, and it quickly fell apart as well. In the meantime, though, we've got this tropical wave coming through the islands with some fanfare, I guess is one way to put it. There's another tropical disturbance down here, and then a little doodad of showers and thunderstorms, not an official term, to the north and east of Puerto Rico, southeast of Bermuda, which is right there. But nothing out there that looks like it's organizing very much. However, that tropical wave, I mean, any of these pieces of energy can bring a quick bout of heavy rain, gusty winds, locally rough seas, that kind of thing. So you don't have to have even an invest or an area that's outlooked by the National Hurricane Center to bring impacts. That's what it's all about at the end of the day. We humans just label stuff to keep up with it and give order out there. But these tropical waves, you know, that's a label for you. Those can also create some problems. So just be aware. If you're down there, you're already aware. If you're traveling down there, be ready. That tropical wave is waiting for you. Maybe you're heading down there today or tomorrow. All right, let's slide the satellite animation over to the east a little bit. These animations, of course, courtesy TropicalTidbits.com. If you hadn't heard of Tropical Tidbits, by the way, they are Levi, Dr. Cowan. He's not limiting. He doesn't have rate limits. Haha. We're not even going to go there. But yes, TropicalTidbits.com. I like to cite the source every once in a while. I think it's important. But most people know about it by now. They really do. There's that tropical wave back on topic. And then, hey, this is pretty cool. You can really see the influence of stronger high pressure out here, really suppressing the intertropical convergence zone. Lots of dry, stable air out here, especially in the mid-levels. Probably not too dry down at the surface. It's pretty humid down there, I would venture to guess, especially with the very warm water temperatures. But yeah, we're just in a period of time where you don't normally see a lot of development anyway. Climatology rules the roost, and we're not seeing much activity out there. A little bit of African dust coming off Africa, of course, and that's why it's called African dust. But nothing too substantial. We don't have these big billowing blankets out here like we've seen in recent years, and that'll continue to allow the main development region and whatnot to be nice and toasty. Now, my sort of provocative thumbnail, El Nino not so tough, question mark. Why would I post something like that? Well, I think it's important to understand there was a lot of fanfare going into the hurricane season and even in the spring that this big, overwhelming, strong to monstrous El Nino, boy, the labels that are sometimes given, and you can't blame the media. It's more social media now, which I guess is part of our general media consumption. But it was just like, wow, this incredibly strong El Nino is going to come in, clean house, sweep everything clean in terms of Atlantic tropical activity, and it may still do so, but look at this. You got to look at the evidence in front of you. And I've had different people point things out to me. They message me on Twitter. You know who you are, and I appreciate that. All the different people that help me to do my job and just keeping things in front of me. I watch the SOI a lot when it's not in the hurricane season, because that helps us to understand the pressure pattern across the tropical Pacific. But once we get into the season, it's usually not as important. But this year, it's kind of made a comeback as being pretty important, and I'll explain why. All right? So first of all, these numbers here, the SOI, the Southern Oscillation Index, the difference in pressure from Tahiti, right there, and Darwin. And that is important because the pressure pattern dictates what happens generally with the trade winds. And you look at the 30-day average. This is huge. It really, really is now positive. The 90-day average is now above or higher than, right? That's what above would mean. That -7 that the Bureau of Meteorology, the long paddock part of that over there in Australia, Queensland government, regarding as the pressure pattern for El Nino. They have been watching this for a long time down there in the land down under. It affects agriculture, the rain patterns, and this stuff's been kept up with for a long time. I don't know my exact history, and I apologize, but believe me when I tell you, this SOI thing, especially for the Aussies, is a big, big deal. And it drives a lot of the patterns down there, and they know a lot about it, especially that the weather influences so much for that big chunk of land down there south of the equator. So the SOI being positive is not an El Nino state. That's the bottom line. That is the quote right there. When it is deeply negative and consistently so, and we had that for a time in May, and then we lost 12 points, or it did, the El Nino did, and we went up. It gave back 12 points roughly, and the June average was -3. That's not -7. I know enough math to know that. And the bottom line, though, the atmosphere and the ocean, the Pacific Ocean, are not fully coupled yet, where the pressure pattern is such that we're driving strong westerly winds across the tropical Pacific. So let me explain using the big old Mercator projection sea surface temperature anomaly map. In the easiest of terms, a negative SOI typically gives us low pressure in the East Pacific, high pressure in the West Pacific, and the net flow of air is typically westerly. Very oversimplified here. That is when you have a strongly negative SOI, and you take all that westerly wind and you get that conveyor belt going, that in turn drives this. You get westerly winds at the surface, it gets this going, you send these large pools of warm water that are normally in the West Pac eastward, they run into South America or they otherwise upwell, and that warm water spreads out across the tropical Pacific like butter on toast. It really, again, a vast oversimplification of it, but that's the general idea. But when the SOI is positive, your lower pressures are west, your higher pressures are east, and the net flow of air is generally from the east to the west, or what we call easterlies. And this SOI pattern has gradually gone up over time, over the last 30 days or so, and now even the more steady, because it's a longer time period, 90-day is coming up. So we've cracked, look, two of the indicators are well above the -7 that the Bureau of Meteorology looks at as El Nino threshold. I just think this is really, really important, and other people are seeing it too. All right, this is a nice list of threads here, if you will, or one thread of a bunch of tweets, whatever you want to call it. Eric Webb talking about it, that the El Nino is taking a siesta. I didn't want to steal his headline for my thumbnail, so I came up with El Nino not so tough, ? And Danny Morris, our CPA from Florida, who monitors this stuff religiously, and then he and Eric kind of going back and forth talking about different aspects of it, and then Yakov, who I've known for a number of years, especially from over at Storm 2K, just a great back and forth conversation about how things have evolved. And the cold pool which I'm going to show you here. There's different data sets for it. Really starting to make a little bit of a comeback. We had, see, there's that conveyor belt. It got kicked off with the negative SOI early. The pressure pattern was such that you sent the conveyor belt into motion, but we haven't had that impetus. The lack of strong westerly winds up here at the surface has not kept this going. So look what's happened. The only warm water relative to average at the subsurface is way over here in the East Pack, and it's not, it's still almost 50 meters deep. Bottom line, the El Nino, not quite as robust as a lot of people thought, prognosticated, thumped their chests about. They were sure that the El Nino was going to come on strong and just shut down the Atlantic hurricane season with lots of westerly shear across the Caribbean and the tropical Atlantic. And we've had a little bit of that, but we also had, we had Brett and we had Cindy. July typically very inactive in the Atlantic, so if it's dead for the next 2 weeks, it's not because of El Nino necessarily, especially that it is starting to show a few cracks there, if you will, in not being quite as strong as people thought, forecasted, were sure about. You never can be sure about the weather until it's happening. That's a good moniker. Is that a moniker or not? It's a good mantra. There you go. A moniker is like what you name yourself. But anyway, the CFS V2 responding as such. Look at this. It's got a little bit of a downtrend. There's a little bit of a lag here, but yes, it's trending down a little bit as we get into July. That was the forecast, and that's exactly what has happened across that Nino 3.4 region, kind of in the heart of the tropical Pacific out there. And then it says, oh, we're going to rebound here, and then come back down. A lot of these blue members, those are your most recent runs, way less aggressive overall. We're not seeing any more of these big spikes up here where the mean was up real high. No. The El Nino probably going to come on a little too weak, too late, and the hurricane season will probably be a lot busier than we thought originally. Now, that's not to say that it has to be. And I'll just give you a very, very quick sports analogy. The 92% free throw shooter who's got 3 free throws because he was fouled on the three-point line normally makes 92% of the shots. He could miss all 3, he or she. Doesn't matter. They could do that. That athlete could blow all 3 of them. They could make 1 out of 3. They can make all 3 and be 100% at that point in time. Just because something has a probability of happening does not mean that it has to happen. And that's why I say it's not happening until it's happening. I mean, that's an easy way out, but understand that the signals are pointing towards a much more active season than we originally thought, going back to March and April and maybe even into May. And now I'll show you this. It's even showing up in some really interesting new scientific research and forecasting tools. This is from Michael Fisher, who is an assistant scientist down at University of Miami, and the Hurricane Research Division down there at NOAA. All right, PhD. All right, I'm going to give him some props there. I don't have a PhD, so I'm going to tend to listen to Mr. Fisher here. And they've got this really neat forecasting tool that they can go back, and this is the training. Training prediction is this right here, the orange. That's what they use to train it. And then the observed is in blue. So their training stuff in the years, look at all these decades gone by, they've hit pretty good. Just as an example, 1995, the training data predicted that. The observed data that really happened, kind of like hindcasting, was this. So that's pretty darn close. It was just a little bit higher than was observed. All right? In the 2000s, the training was here. The observed was much higher. But still, you don't see any big disconnects. It's all pretty much on top of each other, the correlation. That being said, their prediction from whatever, I don't know the background on this completely, but the prediction, and we'll go back to his tweet, is for an ACE, that's what this is showing, of 220 something. And let's shrink this back if I can. So as Dr. Fisher says, with preliminary OISST, those are your sea surface temperature OBS, available through June, I figured I'd share the forecast. This is obviously from something they're working on. after slightly revising the model from the version quoted below. They are looking at 220 ACE units in the Atlantic for 2023. Now, who else is predicting an ACE north of 200? University of Arizona. Who else is predicting an ACE north of 200? UK Met Office. That came out weeks ago. The UK Met Office, everybody scoffed. Oh, there's no way that's going to happen. It still may not. This is not a guarantee. It's just like the stocks, right? The past performance history does not guarantee future performance. The hindcast has done pretty good. We shall see what we shall see. But I think it's very interesting that as we have seen changes in the ENSO state, the El Nino Southern Oscillation not coming on as strong, and as I try to get ready to exit here, we see how warm the Atlantic Basin is over here. This is going to have to get a whole lot stronger. That's going to have to go away, and it is July 2nd on this map. Today's July 3rd, of course. We're running out of time, and this El Nino might not be so tough after all. Isn't that nice how I tied all that up for you there? So we'll be watching. We'll see what's going on, at least for the next several days, next few weeks. Things will be, hopefully a couple of weeks, pretty quiet. I got a lot I got to do. I got to work on some podcast stuff for our Patreon site, working on testing equipment still, and then I think we're going to see a little bit of a monsoon flow set up for the southwest, and I want to be ready for that after about mid-month, so the tropics can stay quiet for the foreseeable future, and that's just fine with me. All right, you guys have a great and safe rest of your holiday time period. I'm going to take tomorrow off. It's 4th of July. Nothing's going on out there. Let's get together again on Wednesday the 5th, though. Does that sound good? Sounds good to me. Until then, again, please be safe out there, especially at the beach. Those rip currents, we lost somebody down here at Carolina Beach yesterday. Somebody drowned, a 58-year-old man trying to rescue some other people. I talked about it on Friday. You guys have got to be really mindful and very careful out there. Seriously. You mean a lot to me. Without you, there's no me. All right, now with that being said, I wish you a very safe 4th of July. I'm Mark Sutton with HurricaneTrack. I'll be back with you again on Wednesday.